Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our grant funding update with Sedale Turbovsky. My name is Colin Main, and I'm a program manager at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. For those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have just seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. You can create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So you can find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. Mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. Now, none of what we do here at the center could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, and BPM. We're grateful and humbled by their contributions. Quick housekeeping, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event, and we want to get to all of your live questions. So please submit your questions at the bottom of the screen in the Q&A function throughout the presentation. We hope to get to them all. During these still unique times in Zoom land, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs that we work with. So I'm going to start by launching a quick poll to let us know how you're feeling about your business right now. We know Q4 is right here. So how are you doing rolling into the end of the year? And welcome, everybody. We'll get started soon. Thank you for your responses here. Great to see you all. All righty. I'm going to end this poll and share those results. So optimism is at the top of the key, but understand there's a little survival mode, some anxiety, and a little fear out there. So hopefully with our grant funding update, we will help with some of those sentiments. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome in the chat to our special guest returning for a grant update. Sedale Turbovsky is the CEO and co-founder of OpenGrants. Sedale, welcome.
So much. I am super excited to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to come back and share some updates. And as a CEO and founder of an early stage startup myself, right there with a lot of y'all, very optimistic about where things are headed, but also, definitely there's always a mix of other kinds of emotions out there in your day to day. So super excited. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in with the presentation here, because there are a lot of really cool things going on in the area of grant funding. So as many of you know, and I'm really gonna look forward to diving into Q&A with folks, but as many of you know, grants are not only non-dilutive, but they don't require any repayment. And so one of the really exciting things about that as a founder, of course, is that you can get funding for your business that doesn't take up space on your cap table, and you don't have to pay it back to anyone. So it's literally the cheapest kind of money you can go out and find, but it's certainly not free. There is an opportunity cost involved. And in the update that I want to give today, I just want to talk about several super exciting programs that are out there to support entrepreneurs and to really help fund small businesses. So the first one I want to talk about is a bit off the beaten path. And this really dives into a concept that we love at OpenGrants, which is the idea of grants as sales enablement. And what that means is that at any given time, the federal government is supporting community organizations, private citizens, industries with subsidies. And frequently these come in the form of grants. And one of the industries that I think maybe many of you might be familiar with that uses a lot of grant funding, especially if you live in California, is the automotive industry. So as you may know, electric vehicles can be quite expensive. The state of California and the federal government, the federal government has a tax credit, but the state of California actually has grant programs. And what these folks do, and I hope as I tell you kind of this analogy, you can think about your own products and how you're approaching sales and think about what this opportunity might mean for you. So what the folks in the automotive industry have figured out is, hey, there's a lot of these grant programs. In this case, because they're subsidies, they're not competitive, which means that as long as there's money there and you send in the right paperwork, you get funding, which is super exciting, right? So what these auto companies do is if you go to buy an electric vehicle in certain communities in California, in the quote that's given to you right at the dealership, you'll see some kind of, you might see a grant program offset where the car now costs $10,000 less or $15,000 less. They're not insignificant. And this is a huge opportunity because right now what is happening with the American Rescue Plan Act is cities, communities around the nation are getting massive amounts of money to do kind of whatever they think might work best. And that's the crazy thing. It's very open-ended. And the really exciting thing is that you as a service provider, as a startup, depending on what you're doing, and really no matter what you're doing, you could be working on enabling small businesses to make more money. You could be a novel solution for traffic. You could be, there's a lot of things that you could be doing that are really applicable to building back better and stimulating the economy and creating jobs and opportunity for individuals, which is a lot of what the American Rescue Plan Act money is for. And so you might think about as you roll through Q4 and you start to see more and more money come out, you might think about leveraging this capital to subsidize your sales. And there's a lot of other opportunities, of course, to subsidize sales with grant funding. But thinking about grants as sales enablement is really exciting for a couple of reasons. One, it means that you don't actually have to compete for money. So frequently when you're writing a grant, as many of you might know, you're competing with other people and your chances of winning are obviously dampened by the fact that you're in competition with other people. With the American Rescue Plan Act and grants as subsidies, really all you're doing is filing paperwork and money is going to somebody to offset the cost, ideally to you, but to your company in general, to offset the cost of your services. So it's a really exciting way to drive revenue, to drive growth, and to make your clients more inclined to buy your product. If they're getting your product at half price, but you're still making all the money, that's a win-win situation, right? So the thing to think through here is frequently the city or government that's around you in your jurisdiction or the group that you're working with, whether that be a community organization or private citizens, right? Joe Schmo out on the street who maybe can't afford the service that you're providing, he probably doesn't know that there might be subsidies for it. So that's a lot of what I think is really exciting. Just to throw some high level numbers out there, ARPA allocated $651 billion for funding in cities and towns and villages across the United States. And you may have heard in the news that your city is using it for X, Y, and Z, and maybe your city's been pretty tight-lipped about it and hasn't said anything about the money that they've gotten. At this point, everyone who has been allocated ARPA funding has the first tranche of it. So the first tranche came in May, and the second half is coming a year later. So that's really exciting to know. If you want to figure out if your city has received ARPA funding, there's a couple of really great resources and links, but the best one that you can look up is the National League of Cities. They have a full database there. It's right on the website. So if you look up the National League of Cities, and I'll share that link a little bit later. I did mean to put that on this slide and I forgot. You can see exactly which cities, and you can filter by state first, or you can search the name of your municipality or village wherever you live. This is a huge opportunity because a lot of these folks, I just spent a week in DC discussing this very subject. A lot of these folks, unfortunately, as they've gotten these tranches of funding, they don't really know how they want to spend it. It's kind of open-ended at this point, and the only thing they do know is that they have to spend it. So what's happened traditionally with these kinds of big subsidies is that cities and states would receive them, but because there was no time limit tied to the money, they would just put it into their general fund or their rainy day fund, and then there would be lobbyists hanging out forever, and eventually somebody got some money, right? What's happening now is that there's these time frames. They need to spend the money in X amount of time after they've received it. It needs to get deployed and into the communities. And the whole idea, right, is to stimulate the economy after, in this sort of post/kind of current COVID world that we live in. So it's a really exciting opportunity to leverage grants as sales enablement. And I'm excited to answer any questions you have about that towards the end of the presentation. But I'm going to pop into some other programs here real quick. So ARPA, just be aware that it's out there. The National League of Cities has all of that data published in a very public database. So you can go look and see if your city received it. And then, I can talk more, and I'm happy to talk more about how you might engage your city to set up programs that might support your startup. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's kind of off the beaten path of kind of the traditional sort of like going after money for your startup as an entrepreneur, but it's a huge opportunity. And there's a lot of other programs out there apart from ARPA that you can use to subsidize sales of your product or your service to the public, to governments, to other groups. So definitely something to consider as you're thinking about your strategy in Q4 and next year. The classic one that everyone wants to talk about, grants for research and development. This is money that goes right into your startup, right? So in 2019, the government deployed $131 billion into early stage small businesses. The amount of funding is going up. It's gone up every year. And the exciting thing about this year is there's not just like a small increase on that 131 billion, it's big. So, they've more than doubled the amount of capital they're allocating to these kinds of programs. And one of the big programs that's responsible for this, and you can see the three acronyms here, and you'll get these slides afterwards, of course. But one of the three acronyms you're going to see here is the United States Innovation and Competition Act. And this is huge. It was initially called the Endless Frontiers Act. You might have heard about it. Really what it is a $200 billion proposal designed to basically, what it says here, right? It's designed to counter China's influence domestically and abroad. The upshot of all of that is really they are looking to deploy more capital into a lot of technology sectors. So you can read the sectors here: semiconductors, drones, wireless broadband, artificial intelligence. And the last line, with increased funding, supervision, and regulation. What all of that means is that effectively what is happening in DC right now is that there's a bunch of folks working on, and OpenGrants is part of this process, there are a bunch of folks working on figuring out how to deploy more capital more efficiently into startup and innovation ecosystems. So this is an act to watch. It's been passed. It's like through the whole process, it's been approved, and now they're kind of figuring out how to like actually logistically take care of this. What's going to happen next? And the really exciting thing about this for any kind of startup that's working in tech, specifically around any of these sectors here, is that the United States government realized that, like, look, hey, we're not really keeping up with these other nations, China being the specter that they decided to raise, but really, the United States has been a bit behind the curve on some of this stuff, and they're looking to really reinvigorate. And I wouldn't say technologically necessarily behind the curve, but certainly in terms of government capital allocated to these sectors, which is the really exciting thing here, is that all of a sudden the government has said, hey, let's pour more non-dilutive money into these businesses. So that 131 billion, let's double it. Hey, let's try tripling it. Let's see what happens. And in the meantime, they're thinking about creating a whole new agency, in fact, to try to do all this. But it's a very exciting time to be in tech. This more updates on this should be coming out in the next quarter. So we're very excited to see what happens there. And really something to keep your eye on as you think about, how competitive this R&D money has been classically in the United States. With some companies, your success rate out of California for SBIR is somewhere around 11% if you just kind of try to do it by yourself. With a consultant, you can bump that way up to like 70 or 80%. But the whole point being that the amount of competitiveness has been directly related to the fact that there's so many applications and not enough money. So we're about to see this huge explosion in capital for tech, and it's super exciting. We're very excited to be partnered at OpenGrants with the Center for American Entrepreneurship, who's been influential and key to making this happen. So if you want to check out somebody or go give some kudos, you can roll over to the Center for American Entrepreneurship and get a lot of good data about this, as well as go say hi and tell them thank you. So really cool program. One of the ones to watch for sure as you think about your strategy for funding your startup in the near future and for accessing non-dilutive capital. This is something to keep your eye on. Another program that's really exciting, and it's actually part of the American Rescue Plan, is the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This is something that's truly interesting, especially for those startups that might be going after SBIR money. It's a way to have the state actually double down and invest in your company, even as a VC potentially. So the State Small Business Credit Initiative is actually what sponsors state venture capital programs. And if you don't know if your state has a venture capital program or not, it's pretty easy to find out. You can just kind of Google around and it'll definitely pop up. These programs are super exciting because the Treasury is, once again, they're rationing up support for investment from the government into technology companies, small businesses, and venture-backed companies in particular. The idea of the state venture capital programs is they actually back venture dollars. So say you raise $10 million, they might back, with another 5 or something like that. So this is another exciting program, something to be on the lookout for. These will be start being released via your state, agencies in the very near future. So all proposals from states are due back to Treasury here at the end of the year in December. And we'll be actively monitoring this and hopefully publishing a pretty exciting update in the near future as these programs ratchet up. It's a really exciting opportunity. It's $10 billion overall allocated to this program, which means there'll be pretty healthy kind of seed stage funds looking to make kind of smaller bets, but throughout the United States. I know that California, for example, has a $645 million in their kind of venture backing program through the SSBCI. So exciting proposals are headed to Treasury. Some of those have been, already there and have been approved. And you might also reach out to your local SBDC, who, at least in Northern California, and I know across California, the SBDCs have been really engaged. Each state approaches these programs differently, but certainly as you think about how you're engaging the government, this is something to tap into and kind of search for and see what you can find out. And for individual states, definitely you can reach out to experts in the OpenGrants marketplace, reach out to your mentors, reach out to your community and ask about these programs. That's one of the big things I hope that you'll take away today. A lot of the programs that I've mentioned so far are kind of in progress. These are huge opportunities that are coming up that I thought would be really important for you to be prepared for. And so I hope that you'll be reaching out, talk to your mentors, talk to folks that you're engaged with, talk to your advisors, talk to, if you have relationships with government, talk to those people ideally, but talk to folks, ask about these programs. And if they don't know about them, ask them to find out or, do some more research. So finally, the other space that is really interesting right now and starting to heat up quite a bit are grants for impact focused work. And this has been driven by two things, of course, right? The world has just and continues to experience, this unprecedented disaster. And I hate using that word because it's way overused, but it's accurate. So the world is recovering from COVID. We're looking at all of these cracks in society, and we're looking at these cracks and failures of government and policy, and just, we're looking at all the things that we need to work on, and we're like, hey, this is a pretty big list. So folks are starting to allocate more capital. You have foundations deploying more money. You have big corporates like Amazon and Google doing quite a lot in the space as well. And a lot of startups, and I'm happy to really answer questions on this one too. A lot of startups tend to think that grant funding, especially from foundations, is kind of out of their reach. And while foundations do, and corporates as well, tend to give more money to nonprofits, a lot of that is because of their tax incentive structure, right? They simply don't want to do all the paperwork, or can't, depending on how their mandates are structured, do all the paperwork to give money to for-profit companies. And that kind of seems to put a startup in a weird position. But really, this is an ideal situation for you. And I hope you're noticing a theme here that, in my last discussion, I talked a lot about grants that you have to compete for and how to optimize for that process. All the programs that I've talked about here, and I'm going to go a bit deeper into this concept. These are more grant programs that you can access and simply apply for, and they're less competitive. And the idea with this, with this last slide here, is to really drive home the concept of partnering in order to secure grant money, which can still be non-dilutive, but simply doesn't require that you go out and apply for it, right? So you can partner at any time. You could partner with a nonprofit that's going after grant funding, and chances are, if you're doing something really awesome or specialized, they're not doing it nearly as well. And they're very interested in partnering with you because they need that capability or that skill. And so just be aware that, giving is up. There's a lot of companies that have done really well throughout the pandemic. There's been a lot of wealth generated. I'm sure you've all kind of watched that happen, right? The people have talked about the I forget what letter acronym they use, but the weird recovery curve, right? Where there's a bunch of folks who've suffered and a bunch of corporations in particular that have done really well. And that has resulted in, this opportunity that's there now where people are looking and trying to do things the right way, or at least trying to get tax write-offs, and they're deploying grant money in order to achieve that. And they're working with nonprofits, they're working with NGOs. We have some really exciting projects that we're working on around the world to do kind of direct aid projects. So there's a lot of capital floating around, and a lot of folks are thinking about how they can really develop a robust approach to philanthropy, a robust approach to engaging their communities and helping folks build back. So it's a really exciting time to be a startup solving whatever problem you are solving, because there are so much latitude out there, so many really open-ended opportunities for you to go out and secure funding for your startup. And sometimes it can be kind of in that subsidy format. Sometimes it can be as a grant. And of course, I didn't mention, but the SBIR program, it's in full effect. In fact, NSF and a few other groups have actually transitioned to rolling applications. So you can apply anytime. There's no longer any weird windows that you have to hit. So there's a lot of money already out there. And as I mentioned, there's a ton of capital coming that's really interesting and compelling. And the government is certainly ratcheting up its engagement of startups and small businesses. So before we open it up for Q&A, I just wanted to give a quick, and I want to leave a little bit of extra time for Q&A because there's usually a lot of it. And then if we run out of questions, I can go back into some of these programs a bit deeper. But I just want to talk really quickly about, the reason that I'm talking about this and the reason I'm really excited about it is we've been spending a lot of time at OpenGrants organizing this ecosystem. And one of the things that we are really passionate about, above and beyond connecting founders to capital, is organizing these stakeholder networks that can really provide, complete solutions to the ecosystem of, our communities and governments. And it's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I recently moved from a city out into like rural America. And, there's a lot of work to be done to give folks some equal opportunities and to serve these ecosystems. So we're very interested in hearing any of your thoughts in terms of like your challenges that you've experienced in partnering with government or working with government. We have some great stakeholders that we've brought to the table in these discussions in the form of AWS, as well as a variety of nonprofits that we're working with. So, at OpenGrants, we're very much interested in hearing how we can help drive more of these relationships and these community building activities, because there's certainly a huge opportunity here to not only build an incredible community, but there's a ton of capital available in the form of all these programs I've just mentioned. So I'm going to go ahead and I know that there's potentially a poll that Colin wanted to run. And then I would love to open it up for Q&A here. And then I'm happy to roll back and go a bit deeper into any of these programs if we run out of questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sedale. So yeah, speaking of the poll, right ahead, while you're thinking of your questions and dropping them into the Q&A, we want to know what's keeping you up at night. So this poll helps us inform the future programming that we're going to be providing for you in the coming months. So let us know where you're at, what you're thinking. And as Sedale mentioned, he's going to dedicate a ton of time during this to get to all your questions. So drop them into the Q&A. We've got time and he's got the expertise. All right, I'm going to end this poll, share those results. Looks like finance, no brainer, is at the top of the key, but also sales, marketing, scale, some team, and just survival mode. So awesome. Thank you so much for that. All right, a lot of great questions. So let's get started. Let's see. So my business plan is 90% done. How do I find grants for disabled veterans?
Great. Yeah, and I saw that there was a few of these questions that were also submitted ahead of time. There's a lot of great places, of course, to find grants for what are called specific like set-asides for groups, including disabled veterans. One of the best places to start, frankly, is with if you work with any kind of mentors, they may know. One of the next best places is actually your local SBDC. They will have some great resources for you. And they tend to have, specifically some support for, veterans in particular. So I would access those. The other place, of course, I'm just going to throw this out there. OpenGrants, it's a great tool. You can pop in and search around. But one of the places that you might get hung up on is that a lot of grant programs, while they may not actually call out veterans, and this is something that you should be aware of, if you are a disabled veteran-owned business and you've actually gotten that certification from the SBA, and I do want to highlight that you need to get certified. You can't simply be a disabled veteran. You have to submit some paperwork and get that certification. So while that may be annoying, once you go through that process, you'll find that in a lot of grant programs, there's actually like additional points or incentives for disabled veteran-owned businesses, and so that's another thing that you might look at is maybe go find a grant that is specifically for what you're working on, and then read through the whole RFP and find out if there's some set aside kind of additional points for that, because there frequently is. So I would do those two things. I would start there, and then you can go from there.
Very helpful. Tons of great questions. Keep them coming in. Let's see. Are there any grants that would likely work for content creators?
One of the really exciting things that I'm glad to see survive the previous administration and is really active in our current administration is the Endowment for the Humanities. There are tons of grants for in fact, the famous, the example I always use, because some of you may have had to suffer through this, as a political science major, I had to watch all of Ken Burns' Civil War documentary, which is really long. And that was all funded by the federal government. So yeah, lots of great places to find grants for content creators. Really, it does depend on the kind of content you're creating. But frankly, the Endowment for the Humanities, it's hundreds of millions of dollars they pump into the arts ecosystem every year. Everything from documentaries to they even have a specific like digital content grant program for like really innovative digital projects. So yeah, it depends on what you're doing, but I would check out the Humanities for sure and see what's available there.
That's super cool. Let's see, Michelle. Hey, Michelle, I'm in rural South Carolina. How do you find grants for rural areas?
It's a great question. So the best place to go is USDA, which actually has, if you just type in USDA rural development grants, you'll find all kinds of grant funding. They have everything from grants to support small businesses to grants to support farming to just ag in general. So not farming specific, but like anything in the ag sector. So forestry, food production, all kinds of really good resources. I would start with the USDA. They're the ones who are kind of in charge of rural America, so to speak, in terms of funding it. And that's where I would start, is with the USDA. You can even, one of the really exciting programs that I'll just mention real quick is USDA just put out a huge grant to help farmers transition to digital platforms in the wake of COVID to sell their products. So if you happen to be a startup that is supporting farmers, or you happen to be a small business entrepreneur who's running a farm of some kind, you might check that out. It's a pretty cool program.
Awesome. Let's see, so many good questions. Let's see. Oh, so we had this come up a little bit earlier, but so a lot of these are US. Do you have any advice on how to find grants outside of the US, and then more specifically ed tech in Africa?
Yeah, this is a great question. So the first thing I would note is in some spaces, you're going to find a lot of NGOs doing grants. In other areas of the world, you're going to find government being very active. So depending on kind of how engaged and like service driven the government is wherever you're living. You might find, you might go on their websites and search for like ed tech in Africa in particular. You might jump on OpenGrants. There's a lot of foundations and NGOs we have that fund those kinds of activities. You're going to find that they're very competitive. And then you may also look at Usaid. So Usaid is a really robust federal program that ships huge packages of funding to Africa. And they often include a variety of kind of sub programs. And then the last place I would mention, if you are looking at Usaid and you don't seem to be able to navigate it because it usually comes out in a big funding package that's kind of dense, is you might connect with like a local embassy from the United States if you can find one and make that connection. They have programs that they run. So those are the places I would start, certainly.
Solid advice. Two-part employee-related question. First is, what happens if my company has 0 employees? I'm guessing if they apply for a grant. And then second one, do you know about grants for job creation?
Yeah, so so there are lots of grants for job creation right now, but if you have no employees, you can of course apply for a grant. The grant could be for building your business, as long as there's a lot of grants for small businesses, as I mentioned, and small businesses anywhere from 1 to less than 500 employees. So as long as you're on that spectrum, you're good to go. You do have to have like a real business. So the grants that we don't really look at too much and support in terms of going after are kind of like personal grants. As like a solo recipient, it's hard to compete. Like if you're saying, hey, I'm going to use a grant program to subsidize sales to private citizens, that's more doable. But if you're looking for like a grant for you, it's hard to give that. But if you're looking for a grant, like if you're a solopreneur and you have a business entity, right? All I'm saying is you have to be incorporated, right? If you have a business entity, you can use grants to sell your products and do all kinds of things. But if you're just like a person, you haven't incorporated, you're going to have a hard time getting grant funding other than as a subsidy for something you're buying. So.
Helpful. Okay, there's a question there's a ton of grants versus loans out there. Since the money comes from the gov, can you apply to multiple grants, especially because they're so difficult to get?
Yeah, and let me circle back and address the other question of grants for job creation. So this is a great question because it really and this is something I wanted to highlight is, for example, right now the EDA has these big programs out to create jobs, and they are all kind of branded differently. But one of the ones that they just launched recently was like the Build Back Better Jobs. I think that's the exact title of it. So if you go to EDA and look at their grant programs, just go to eda.gov, look at their grant programs, you can see all that. But one of the exciting things about these job creation programs is, and this goes to what I was mentioning earlier, is you could stack this money, of course. There are some cases, like if you go after R&D money, so if you're like applying to research something specific, and then you ask to go get money to research that specific thing from another agency, if they find out about that, that's very illegal, and they're not going to look kindly on that. You may get blackballed. You'll certainly not get the money, and it can be a real problem. But in terms of like community development and job creation, these agencies like to see more funding involved in the project because they want to see that the project will succeed. And in fact, on most federal grant budgets in particular, there's actual line items for like the other grants, other support that you're receiving for these projects. And so as you think about if you're working on something, I think we published a case study a while ago that there's a company, and I actually unfortunately forget their name, but they were training. Their whole company was like to train people in STEM, like they were a boot camp, a coding boot camp, and they scaled their company with a bunch of EDA grants. They grew pretty aggressively using federal funding. And so you think about like the value you're bringing to the community or whatever problem you're solving. This is a perfect time to you say, hey, there's this EDA grant, and guess what? With this ARPA funding, we could create 100 jobs here in downtown or X, Y, and Z, impacts. It's a great time to think about that and to start thinking about how to do more coalition building and partnership. And that's kind of one of the things I was trying to highlight earlier is there's huge opportunities right now to partner and like create these really cool comprehensive solutions. So as you as an entrepreneur think about your business, if this sounds like something that you're working on, it's an awesome time to go after it. So yeah, you can definitely stack that kind of money together.
Love that. Speaking of partnerships, somebody's asking a little bit about expanding on when is looking for partnerships with universities and college is looking for partnerships and universities a good option, and how do you make them appear to be mutually beneficial?
With universities, it's pretty easy, right? Like they just want to look good. And for you get money and get to do your project typically. University partnerships are awesome, especially for tech companies, for a couple big reasons. One, SBIR is one of the programs out there that funds a lot of R&D, and STTR it's less used and much less competitive, basically sister. And STTR, requires that you partner with a university or research institution, as opposed to SBIR, which you can kind of do cold, and you don't have to have any of those partnerships. So if you're out there, looking to differentiate, or you're looking to really leverage the resources of an institution, which is a huge, benefit to you, they're just looking to get money and get their name out there, right? So like, if you all of a sudden became known as, the university that launched the next biggest, the next big health tech, med tech, or whatever tech company, that's a big deal for you. And that's how you rack up wins in your win column. And for you as a startup, you're just getting, you're getting funded, which is sweet. So yeah, definitely it's mutually beneficial by nature. You don't have to worry about like trying to position it as otherwise. And especially if you have those connections or you need to go develop those connections, highly recommended. It'll make you more competitive, and you'll be able to access programs that you might not be able to access otherwise, like STTR.
Love that. Speaking of SBIR, somebody's asking about if the tech company that we're developing doesn't fit exactly into one of the solicitations. Are there general solicitations for SBIR funding, or is it better not to apply at all?
There are lots of general solicitations for SBIR funding. The most famous of them, of course, is NSF. So NSF has general solicitations under such a wide range of technologies that I think you'd be hard pressed to find a technology that you're building that doesn't fall into something they're funding. However, if you manage to do that and you're like, no one wants this tech or no one knows this tech exists, the other really cool avenue out there are these BAAs, which are broad agency announcements. And so broad agency announcement is a precursor to grant funding, but they do announce like these big generalized topics where you could really fit anything. And they typically request input from the community. And so you might look up BAAs for whatever agency that you feel your tech is probably most relevant to, and see if they're running anything like that. Those are kind of like the big buckets, but typically NSF like takes everybody. They don't fund everybody, but basically under their funding topics, you can find something that applies.
That's great. Couple questions around using OpenGrants, or just general advice around finding grants for minority-owned women-owned creative businesses.
Yeah, this is a great question. It's very similar. The answer is very similar to the answer I gave for my disabled veteran-owned businesses. You first want to make sure that you've done anything that you need to do to get those certifications in place. For example, in the state of California, and this is a nuance that I didn't mention earlier, there are federal certifications for these kind of set aside designations. And then there's also typically state certifications. And sometimes there's even city-based certifications. So a great example, and those are typically big cities. So New York, City of LA have their own cert processes so that you can become like a woman minority-owned business or something like that. SBA on the federal level has a certification process for women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses. So you'll want to make sure to do that paperwork first, so that you have those certs. And then similarly, you can reach out to folks, talk to mentors, advisors, investors, and then as you search, you can search for those things, but frequently it tends to be kind of buried in the text. And as we launch some of the next generation of OpenGrants tools, we do hope to be able to deliver better matches based on this information. And we're pretty excited about what's coming in Q4. But honestly, right now, the best way to do this is to connect with our consultants and really help connect with them that way.
Awesome. Speaking of consultants, how do you screen grant writers for a good match, and what should their fee structure be?
This is a great question. So screening grant writers for a good match, ideally they know the program that you're working on, and they know the agency, and they know something about the tech. That's like the best match, right? Is they kind of know your industry sector, whatever you're working on, and they definitely need to know the program and the agency. So my example here is like, if you're going after NSF SBIR funding, and you happen to be a company that works in bioenergy, you better not go hire a grant writer who works for the Gates, like works on Gates Foundation nonprofit grants. Like if you do that, you're just going to have a hard time. Like it's not going to be good. And fee structure really tends to depend on their seniority and their expertise and what you're working on. So we've seen everything. I've seen everything from like, $20 an hour to $385 is probably like the top end of compensation an hour that I've seen for grant writers. And, it depends. Do they have a PhD? Are you working on, the next generation of nuclear devices? Then, that person's going to be expensive. If you're a nonprofit working, trying to like solve the housing crisis, $100 an hour is pretty reasonable for someone who's going to help you get funding from the city to do that. So yeah, just it depends on what you're doing.
I love that.
You should definitely vet them just on their expertise, knowledge, talk to their references. This is just kind of the basic stuff that you would do it for any other hire.
Super helpful. A lot of people are asking case specific ones, but I want to get to all of these. So you guys got some good ones coming in. This one's interesting. And do you see the LGBTQ community being added to the set asides or preferences similar to local minority women, veterans? You were talking about the certification process.
Yes, we do. And I'm super excited you brought that up because we actually did a webinar on this a few months ago, and I'll see if I can send the link over so that y'all can listen to it. But yeah, it's something that, the government's been increasingly aware of. And we're really excited to see set asides for all kinds, all different groups of underserved communities that have typically not been included in these processes. So there's certainly an evolving policy on that front. And we're very excited to be partnered with people like INGEN and the Center for American Entrepreneurship that have done a lot to move that stuff forward. So yeah, it's definitely becoming more relevant and prevalent. And obviously on the federal level, and then in certain states, and then there's other states that are a little more backwards, but yeah, it's happening.
That's awesome and good news. How do we get finance to the impact focus? I guess it's like impact company. How do we look for finance for grants around just impact focused finance?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just on like the impact front, obviously you're representing some kind of like, not to use it in a derogatory way, but you're representing some kind of special interest. So go find the group that's, leading the charge there, or some of the groups that are leading the charge, and ask them. But it's all about aligning incentives, right? So if you're working on homelessness, the states and generally government has a really hard time solving all these problems. That's why they rely on private companies and startups and entrepreneurs to do it. So if you're like solving homelessness, go talk to it. I found out today, and I've spent 10 years working in government. Literally yesterday, found out that there is a council on homelessness in the state of California that moves a budget that's in the billions. That's incredible. There's a whole group that I knew nothing about until yesterday, and it was because I asked a very pointed question in a meeting to some policy people. It's like, what actually happens, with this chunk of money that just looks like it goes over here? So be aware that there are, like, especially in these kind of interest specific niches, there are huge amounts of money, and these people are very, these policymakers and civil servants are very interested in working with you. Whether or not you get that vibe on the onset, they really are, because they need solutions, and they don't have a lot of them. And especially when you get into these places that don't have enough attention, right? The government spends lots of money on the military. We think about, like, it's just something that's in our culture and our minds a lot. And unfortunately, the opposite is true for things like homelessness and education. Like these are things that unfortunately we haven't like really thought through a whole lot about, and we certainly don't allocate a lot of money to. So, those are places to go look.
That's great advice. My guy, Jeff. Hey, Jeff, do you recommend registering as a 501c3 or LLC, C Corp in the US if you're operating in Africa, or is it prudent to strictly use our local company registration?
I assume this is kind of about optimizing for securing grant money. And I'll say what I always say here, and that is that the idea of getting a grant should not in any way influence your business. You should optimize for whatever business outcome you're trying to create with your business entity. And you can get a grant by partnering. You can do a bunch of different ways. There's a bunch of different ways to get the grant money. So worry about like your business outcome first. Are you trying to get acquired? Probably don't be a nonprofit. Like if you're trying to make billions and eat the world and be huge, probably don't be a nonprofit. If you're trying to attract venture capital, definitely don't be a nonprofit, right? Like there's all these, but the converse is true, of course. Is like if you're trying to be a nonprofit or your whole driver is outcome and you want to be judged on not your returns but on your impact in communities, then a nonprofit might be a way to go, or a B Corp or something. So definitely optimize for your business outcome. Like what are you trying to achieve? And then the grant funding is really secondary. You can always go get grant money or participate in grant funded projects, no matter what kind of entity you are.
Love that. Yeah, and Jeff's profit with a purpose, so I think that answer really helped him. Let's see. What's the website for NSF? I would just Google NSF and you'd probably find that. Are there any grants for agritourism?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I don't actually know the answer to that, so I will have to talk to the team and see what they tell me. But I would imagine that there are. There's certainly, and you might even look at the EDA programs that are popping up. I actually do know that there is an EDA program that's specifically for tourism in general. That's the Economic Development Administration. So you might check out that program.
Awesome. Let's see, off topic, how does OpenGrants monetize?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So we do two things. One is if you hire a consultant in our marketplace, we take 20% of what you pay them. And then a bigger driver of our revenue, in fact, is the actual data. So we take the data in aggregate from our marketplace and we actually sell it to governments to help them understand how to fund populations, how to design grant programs, and how to be more efficient with their capital, which is actually our capital as citizens who pay taxes. So that's what we do. That's how we make money.
Yeah, awesome. And we had a question about this earlier, and I think you touched on it, but I just want to circle back to make sure that I'm answering it. So are there grants for somebody looking to start anything, a nonprofit, a business, just from the ground up? And I think your answer is you had to be an existing entity, right?
Yeah, you might find like there's programs. I know like some SBDCs run a few different programs where you can like build a sort of architect a business and then like start things rolling. But like you typically need to be an incorporated entity of some kind first. There's also there's all kinds of different programs out there. This is a bit off topic, but there's programs where they're like, hey, if you work at a FANG company and you want to start something else, we'll pay you 50 grand to quit and like start a company and we'll take equity. So like there's a lot of different stuff like to help you get started. But typically speaking, if you need to have an entity and you need to be incorporated, I will say that there are a lot of services out there that make that really cheap and easy to do. So usually I think about $1,000 or less. In many cases, you can spend like $280 and become incorporated. Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunities. If you can't come up with $280, talk to friends, talk to family, reach out. There's actually some really cool micro VCs that will fund you as a human being to start a company. One's called Chisos Capital that I'd highly recommend. There's a lot of new kind of avenues right now to really break down those barriers to getting started.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah. Incorporation is paperwork. That's pretty much it is. You don't have to have a building or you have to have an address and a piece of paper that's filled out. Very detailed, by the way. So make sure you don't get somebody else's eyes on it.
Yes.
I'm not sure what FANG is, but you might. If you work at a FANG company and we pay you to start a business, I'm interested in that.
Cool. I'll send some more info. That's a program that one of my friends is running, actually. So if you want to email me, I can explain more about that.
Awesome. Yeah, and we dropped your contact info in the.
Yes, and someone just took the opportunity. FANG is Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google.
Yep. All right. We got to the veterans question already. So Bob, if you didn't catch that, there's a lot, and just make sure you go through the SBA to get certified. Audio will be available after this presentation. Let's see, grant funding for home healthcare startups.
Yeah, great. I mean, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is that, you know, in these packages of infrastructure and ARPA funding, there's a lot of opportunities for all kinds of companies in that space. I would say that, you know, depending on the region that you're in, you might find support from not only local government, but also federal and state. So, you know, the longer answer here is that it's really specific, right? Like, what exactly are you doing with that home healthcare? Is it a device? Is it a service? Are there people you're employing? What region are you in? What does your ownership of the company look like? What's the entity type of the company? All those questions will really steer you towards the right funding. So as you think about answering those, you know, work with your advisors, work with your investors, you know, find people who are knowledgeable. We have a lot of those folks on the OpenGrants marketplace, but you can Google around and find them as well. But yeah, it's unfortunately, like, I always laugh because I remind myself I'm frequently annoyed when I go to my attorneys with questions because they take 2 hours to answer the question, and it's always more complicated when I come out. And unfortunately, this space is very much like that, where you'll come in and say, "Hey, is there funding for this?" Like, yeah, there is, but here's 50 other questions we got to answer to get to the core of what's interesting here. So I do encourage you, like, a big part of what we're trying to do here is inject joy and hope into this process. So one of the fun things you can do is sit down with someone like myself who has a lot of experience in the space and ask them these questions. Have a nice chat, go deep, buy them lunch. Like, you don't have to pay a bunch of money to get this advice. A lot of people like myself who have this information will very happily spend some time with you to tell you what's going on and what the situation is. And then should you hire someone like that, then you can then pay them to, like, do some of the heavier lifting. But to get started, you shouldn't be paying someone a bunch of money just to, like, give you an hour-long consult on this subject. Reach out, talk to people.
I love that. We had a question around, because you mentioned talk to mentors, talk to investors, talk to advisors. So thanks for that question. And they're asking about how to get more mentors that are helpful in this arena. And then I'm gonna steal a bit of that answer because please. We have a mentor matching platform called Mentor Makers, where you can just sign up for free and get free mentorship. But I want to hear your answer to where to access people who are experts at grants.
Yes. So of course, my answer to this is, first and foremost, you can pop over to OpenGrants. You can sign up for free. You can jump into our marketplace. And just to give you some context here, we used to host free office hours where you could come and meet with any of our experts. And now the cool thing is you can just message them and meet with them on your own, and we don't have to get in the way. So you hop onto our marketplace, search for whatever you're working on, search for healthcare startups, search for SBIR, search for ice cream company, whatever it is. Like, get into our marketplace. We've organized all these people for you. You can message them. It's free. They'll message you back. You can have a discussion. It's great. So that's my recommendation. But I was also going to mention, there's a mentor matching tool. The center has that, and I'm sure they've posted a link to it. And then I'll just throw out this too. It's like, there's a lot of other cool tools. Lunch Club is one of my favorites personally. I've networked on Lunch Club. I think I went for 48 weeks. I had at least one meeting a week with someone new, just a random person that I'd never met before. The cool thing about Lunch Club is they actually curate those matches. So while they were randomly generated, they are also highly relevant to the work I was doing. I would tell Lunch Club I need to meet investors, I'd meet investors. Tell them I need to meet policy people, I'd meet policy people. So there's great tools. Lunch Club's free to use. There's a lot of great tools to really help you connect and expand your network. Mentor Makers is a great resource. Highly recommend it. OpenGrants, another great one for grant specific folks.
Yeah. Yeah, we are not the only source, but we are a good one. And you're a great source for people who are experts at grants, because many of our mentors on there have some exposure, but definitely not the deep expertise that you do. All right, we're almost at time. Let's see if we can get to a couple more of these. Couple questions around like specific grants to climate change, sustainability, creator, circular economies. Is there like sustainability focused arenas for people that people should be looking for with regards to grants?
Yeah, 100%. We actually, highly recommend OpenGrants is a good source. You can search through what we have. There's this, frankly, the state of California heavily funds all of that. We are launching sort of vertical specific pages within our platform shortly here, where you'll be able to look at curated big lists of climate, for example, related grants. The other places to look, of course, is just to engage with those communities. I'm a big fan. I'm actually a founding fellow of the On Deck Climate Tech ecosystem. It's a great program. You can meet a lot of climate tech founders there who have a lot of knowledge in this space as well. Once again, unfortunately, the answer is the same. Talk to your network, advisors, founders. Use some of these tools that we've mentioned. And that's a great place to jump off.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, people, it takes a village, as they say, right?
Yep.
So, awesome. Well, we are at time, so sorry that we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but we know how to get a hold of you if they want to. So, Sedale, really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise in grants, which you are obviously an expert in. And we look forward to hoping to get another update from you next year. Q4, there's still grant money out there, as Sedale said. So don't worry. And we look forward to seeing you all back online soon. We've got great webinars coming up for you all. So we look forward to seeing you then. Sedale, you rock. Thanks again. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us.